This is a long form episode 20 breaking down the basics, and we're talking about severity types. So as we mentioned in the short form, these heavily go with the risk types that you're looking at, and you'll see that reflected here in the example. What we're going to do is we're going to take one scenario and I'm going to review it in 3 different ways to determine the severity. So the scenario is we release 20 pounds of chlorine from blocking in an exchanger from thermal expansion. We're looking at the severity. We're going to then look at a team-based approach. So as you can see here in the documentation that we put, it's solely team-based. There's no numbers or charts or anything. We're documenting that at 20 pounds, we think this is going to cause a lost time injury from someone. This was based on a team assessment and what the team and the process company has experienced before when releasing a small, relative term there, amount of chlorine. The second model, as you can see, is more of a semi-quantitative approach or a matrix approach. What someone has done, this could be the facilitator or the process engineer, has developed this table of chlorine release amounts. They've done that with dispersion models or chemical data to determine at certain amounts we have a corresponding severity. So you can see here, releasing 20 pounds, same severity, but the reason they defined it is that threshold was below 50 pounds. So if you release below 50 pounds, it's a lost time injury. Above 50 pounds, and they determined it a hospitalization or a fatality. Okay, so this data was created using some actual numbers, and then as the team, we just come in and we say, okay, is it less than 50 pounds or is it greater than 50 pounds? So these types of tables can be used for whatever data you want. It's just important for the team to know what were the inputs, so they can read what the outputs are and determine, does their scenario best fit which cell. Lastly, you can see here on the screen, you're looking at a dispersion model. We put in some factors of a potential scenario, and we released 20 pounds of chlorine to show us how far out this would go, and that way the team can determine, would someone be in that area and would it impact them? As you can see now in the worksheet, we actually documented the severity different. We documented that someone could be seriously hospitalized or have a fatality based on this release because they would be in the area of this cloud. So you can see here how we have a different severity based on as we get more refined. We could have said the same thing. We could have had the same severity. It doesn't mean every time you use a quantitative scenario, it's going to be a worse severity, because we could have said, well, someone is really stationed further out than the fatality zone and are really just in the zone where someone could just be injured. So how did we determine that? Well, lastly, I'll show you here what we looked at. Government agency gives this to response personnel to be able to show 60-minute exposure times. And so we looked at this 60-minute exposure time. We saw that this amount of ppm goes out this far, and that corresponds to a level, and that level, as a company, we've decided corresponds to a severity. So really, depending on the complexity and the hazard of the process, this is going to determine how you want to look at your severities. Obviously, a qualitative is going to be more straightforward. Sometimes that's more efficient. Sometimes it's less efficient because the team will go back and forth on what the severity is. A quantitative assessment is going to not be super efficient, but it's going to be very thorough. And kind of that in between, looking at the matrix, really ties in your efficiency, but also ties in some numbers for the team to look at. This is the long form content for the video. As always, keep checking us out on our website, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook.